Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Users Did What? I'm Yael Mark, a product consultant who helps teams turn messy user behavior into smart product decisions. On this podcast, we unpack real stories from product managers and UX researchers who've had their assumption flipped by the people they're building for. Today, I'm joined by Andrea Nelson, a seasoned product leader and researcher with unique blend of deep technical expertise and strategic product vision. From autonomous vehicles to aerospace innovation, she led the multidisciplinary teams across Motional, AT&T, Latch, and NASA, which is so cool. Currently head of research at Deterrence, Andrea brings decades of experience in human-centered design, generative AI, and advanced prototyping. And I'm so excited to have her today. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
To kick us off, how would you explain product management to someone who has never stepped foot in the tech industry?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I typically describe product managers as the deciders of what to build in tech. Engineers are usually seen as the builders in the tech
Mm.
industry, but product managers are really crucial for deciding what to build from signals in the market. And then engineers are typically tasked with how to build it, how to execute.
I love this definition. It's such a great way to put it. I often feel like explaining product management is sort of harder than actually doing it.
Great.
Although we do have our challenges. And speaking of which, you worked across a range of industries, but for today, we're zooming in on the autonomous world, which is an industry that is known for its safety concerns, strict and heavy regulations, and complex tech. But the challenge you faced was something a little different. Can you drive us through what happened? Pun intended.
Pun intended. Yes, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I was a leader at Motional, the vice president of product there. I had a fairly large team comprised of researchers, UX designers, product managers, and they all worked really well together. But the fascinating research that we were doing was more around community comfort and adoption of autonomous vehicles. So, we understood that it isn't just how well the cars can drive themselves because that's a technical hurdle that can be solved, but with any new technology in terms of adoption, it's how safe do people feel, how do they feel around the technology and adoption within their community. And so it wasn't just about the folks using the cars, but it was all of the people around that vehicle as well.
Wow. So who are this by users, quote unquote?
Yeah, we call
Right.
them like external stakeholders. So when you
Ooh.
think about driving on the road, if you're in your own vehicle and you're driving, those other people that you interact with would be the external stakeholders. That includes other drivers of vehicles, pedestrians in the on the streets where you're driving, but also first responders, firefighters and police officers have to interact with vehicles whenever there's an incident.
Right. But it's like it sort of makes sense only when you say it, but doesn't come naturally when working as a product manager in that space. So what was this aha moment? How did you even realize that they matter to
Well,
the overall experience?
That's a great question because actually the automotive OEM that we were working with also didn't see this as a blind spot necessarily. They were very heavily focused on the interactions inside the vehicle, the human machine interactions of the passenger to the vehicle. But we had some user researchers that were taking rides just to get an idea for what is the experience. And what they noticed was there were reactions of folks on the sidewalk that they were interacting with these people as they were waiting for rides and getting feedback from pedestrians, from people in the community. And that led to this idea of the other stakeholder, where we were actually able to build studies where we could target those specific people, whether it's looking at the pedestrian and how they interact with cars today, how they expect cars to behave, and how they would feel safer if they could anticipate the behavior of an autonomous vehicle in the same way that they do a human driven vehicle. Similarly, with other drivers of other vehicles and also first responders.
Wow. This external stakeholders are not the ones that are shown in our dashboards, but they still absolutely shape the experience for the overall community and how this product is being interacted with the community. It's so interesting because they shape the product perception, they shape the volume of support among the potential direct users, but not necessarily will be using it. Although in this scenario, some direct users, quote unquote, again, could be external stakeholders, right? Because even if
Right.
you use autonomous cars, sometimes you will cross the road. So it's sort of creating this full experience for direct and external.
I think a lot of product managers tend to focus on who's going to be the buyer and who's going to be the user, right? But the real
Mhm.
blind spot is there that if you have these external stakeholders that are maybe not influencing someone's opinion to use a service or to buy a product, but they could inadvertently influence someone to not use or to not buy. And in that sense, with autonomous vehicles being a cutting edge technology, if you start building a community consensus that it is dangerous, or firefighters and police don't know how to interact, don't want to respond, you have this negative feeling in the community, and that actually impacts people's willingness to get in the car.
Wow. So how did you identify the other stakeholders?
We did an internal brainstorming session. Once we had our first kind of external stakeholder, and we had the knowledge brought back in-house, and we had discussions about it. We then had a brainstorming session about who are all the stakeholders and what individual studies would we put together or exercises to figure out how best to interact with them. So we had a workshop targeting first responders. We had a user study that was targeting other drivers and their behavior with vehicles, and then a study that was specifically targeted at pedestrians.
Such an important moment just to stop here and say, like, product managers should do that more. Sort of zooming out, see the scene and what is the potential interactions that you have with the product. And to your point, not just looking at the buyer and the user, but also to this persona that might prevent the user and the buyer to even interact with the product. Oh, we still don't know how the story ended. So what did the solution end up looking
Yeah.
like?
So the solution, I will say that it doesn't have a magical ending in the sense that we found a silver bullet and a feature that really made a difference by itself. We did notice that there were specific behaviors of the vehicle. In terms, a great example is when you pull up to a stop sign and there are other vehicles waiting at the intersection, making your intention to go by slowly inching forward is something that we do as physical drivers. That's not really a regulated legal rule, but is kind of a etiquette of the road, if you will. And so we started building in these etiquette rules into the driving rules of the car to better interact with other drivers. So that was a big win on the feature side. But the biggest win for us was being able to communicate these results back to the OEM, the automotive manufacturer, because they actually didn't have a research team like this. And they were just blown away with all of the insights. And then they could finally use all of this information to just build the car from the beginning. So when we talk about autonomous vehicle companies, they're looking to modify the vehicle after it's already been built with autonomous features. But that doesn't really work sometimes if you're trying to do add-on things. A lot of times you have to solve these problems, at the very beginning when the car is being designed. So that partnership with the manufacturer, just opened a lot of doors.
Wow. I have so many things to say, but first of all, I really love the fact that you chose a human trait or a human etiquette and implement that in the autonomous car. I think leaning on a familiar behavior to boost adoption is such a smart move. You don't need to teach the users what they need
Right.
to do or what are the signals they need to get from the autonomous car. You sort of just fit into the flow, to the habits and routines that users already have without telling them, "Oh, you see this signal, this means that they've seen you." How did you convince the other stakeholders? How do you convince people to care about something users won't be even thankful for because they won't notice it, at least the direct?
Right. So that is internal to the company. It's really important to build a story around what these stakeholders think and what is the impact of their perception. We were able to build the results of these studies into our own surveys that we were conducting with actual riders in our vehicles in Las Vegas. And so we could validate things that we were testing in other cities on other vehicles and data we were gathering around perception of autonomous vehicles in general with our own rider base, and then tell the story of, does this data apply? How does it impact? We could ask writers, for example, a direct user of the service, to say, okay, if you knew that law enforcement did not know how to interact with this vehicle and the fire department had no idea how to save you in an accident, what would your reaction be, for example? So we could really validate that and build a story that we could then tell the engineering team, because I think the best way to get features prioritized is to really build an understanding of how this connects to users, how this connects to building the business, how this connects to adoption. Once you tell that story in an effective way, it really is a no-brainer.
I totally agree. Although it's counterintuitive, involving the other stakeholders and colleagues right at the beginning, they're pulling you to different directions with their ideas, but they do feel more involved and they do understand much more fully why we're building this, and they will have much more motivation to do that. The art of adjusting it to each one of the stakeholders, it's something that we have to learn as product managers.
Yeah. What's interesting too is a lot of people are familiar with a lot of the conveniences we have in the tech world right now, voice to text, for example. All of these things were built by looking at a subset of the population, right? Folks with disabilities. And this is a very similar mindset. You're looking at a smaller subset of the population and targeting their needs, and that will impact the product in a way that is actually beneficial for the user as well. So what we found was, when I talk about inching into an intersection to indicate that you're going to be turning, while that really is targeting other drivers and their perception of what the vehicle is doing, it also increases how safe the passenger feels, because the car is behaving like a human driver. And the passenger feels like, oh, I know these other cars know where I'm going and they're not going to hit me because it's behaving like a human driver. So there's that little connection, right, where we don't necessarily always see, oh, I'm targeting a different stakeholder, but it is really impacting the core customer as well.
Love that. Looking back now, what would you do, what you wish you had done earlier to spot these kinds of overlooked users?
Oh, well, that's
In hindsight.
in hindsight. I think we did things as quickly as we could with the autonomous vehicles. What I do notice in hindsight is that over my career, being in a large number of different tech industries, this has actually come up a number of times, and I've never really identified it as a best practice, which I think is on me, right? I have seen this across different tech, different products. There's always this like external stakeholder or someone who could potentially torpedo a sale or to torpedo the adoption with a particular behavior or particular notion of the product. And I have, over the course of my career, taken different steps to combat this. But it wasn't until I worked at Motional where I put those dots together and I thought, oh, this is really how we should attack it every single time. There should always be personas that are the customer, the buyer, which are pretty standard in product management, but then who are the external stakeholders who could really block a sale or block adoption? And that is something that I have taken on now and further in my career.
Amazing. Such a powerful insight. And for PMs that are dealing with low adoption, what clues should they look for? Because they might be designing for the wrong person or just only one out of many.
It's really just being curious about anyone that interacts with the product or how the product can impact other people, even if they're not directly interacting with it. A really great example is, the iPhone user. You always think of, well, the user is the person using the iPhone. But if you think of the Android user as a participant in group texts with iPhone users, right? There's the Android user is obviously not a customer, very, very
Mhm.
far from a customer, but just the relationship between those two people And how is that relationship impacted by the features on both of those devices? It's really great to just think of it as the user is the middle of a wheel, and like, what are all the spokes to the rest of their environment?
Low adoption isn't always about the core user. It might be someone else that is blocking the flow entirely. Small and human-centered details can make or break adoption. Thank you so much for
You're
sharing
very
your
welcome.
insights and your story with us today. And that's it for this episode of Users Did What. See you next time.